Hello everyone, in this video we will go over what kind of stats are good on your items when you are leveling. What are the stats that you want to prioritize through Act 1 to 10 and why exactly do you want these stats? Now, if you watched my other video on how currency and crafting works, then this video is going to be a lot more easier for you to understand. So, when you're leveling throughout the acts, you can have different form of items on your character, right? Like helmet, boots, gloves, and so on and so on. And we are going to quickly go over the stats that you want on specific items that are most important to have during the acts because of different reasons. So the first things we're going to go over is such things as helmet, gloves, and body armor. Now, in most cases, you want to prioritize life and resists almost all the time. You can always have things like evasion rating if you're playing an evasion build, or armor, or maybe even energy shield to build some form of defenses on your character as well. But the most important thing to look for when leveling on these sort of items is life and resists. Now, on the boots, it is also very much the same. You want life and resists, but on the boots, it is mainly prioritized to have increased movement speed, because your character is going to feel very slow in the act, so having good movement speed on your boots is going to make it feel a lot better. Now, for your jewelry, so-called rings, amulet, and belt, you also once again want life and resists. But one thing that you can keep in mind as well that you can look for specifically on jewelry is also some form of stats. Strength, intelligence, dexterity is very easy to get on jewelry, and therefore you can basically look for that as well on top of having life and resists, because in most cases you're going to need stats in order to equip items, equip gems and so on while you're leveling, because certain items require you to have a certain amount of intelligence. For example, this robe here requires me to have 91 int, the boots requires me to have 21 strength, and also as you level your gems you're also going to be required to have higher stats in order to have your high level gems, and leveling gems is obviously very important for damage. So look for life resist, and once again you're looking for stats as well if you can on your jewelry, and you can also look for stats on some of your gear as well. For example, on my helmet here there's some dexterity, and on the boots there's 8 strength. One thing to remember as well is that if you find an item that is quite decent, like let's say this jade amulet here, you have some dexterity on it and you also have some life, but you're like, oh, I have no resists, this is now a bad item. Well, remember from the crafting video, you can have prefixes and suffixes, and this is a rare item and only have one of each. And there's a trick where you can use your crafting bench in your hideout to actually add one more modifier on your item. So since I have open prefixes and open suffixes, I can choose here to maybe add some form of damage, or in this case I want to add some more resists. So I have like one alteration here that I've been farming, and I want some lightning resist because I am requiring lightning resistance not to die. I just craft that, I hit 17 because it was between 16 and 20, and now I have lightning resistances as well on this amulet, and now I can put it on and I can survive more easily in the acts. And remember, the reason why you want life and resists is because life determines obviously how much life your character has, and if you take a hit you're obviously going to die if you have a very low life pool. And then you have things as armor and stuff like that to mitigate the amount of damage incoming, or you have evasion as your defense so you don't even get hit at all, or you have energy shield, which is basically a shield that protects your life first, so you take a hit, you lose your energy shield, and then you lose your life and so on. All those things are very important to have, and obviously it's very important to have a high life pool, so if you do take a chunky hit you don't get immediately one shots. And resistances are super important in Path of Exile, because when you take elemental damage you can lower the amount of elemental damage taken if you have a lot of resists. Now the cap for your resists are 75%. So in Act 1 to 5 you obviously want to have as much as possible, but getting 75% might be quite hard. But you don't have to get 75%, like having 30, 40, 50 is going to be enough. Then once you kill Act 5 Kitava is going to lower your resistance by 30%, so you're going to try to want to get more resistances for Act 6 to 10, and of course when you finish Act 10 Kitav is going to lower your resistances by 30% once again, and when you start mapping, it is very crucial to get at least 75% resistances. The numbers that you see here in the parentheses are when I have more than 75%. Like for example, I have cold resistances 88%, it's because I have more than 75. So it shows me how much more I have than just 75, but 75% is the normal cap. Now you can increase that cap, but we're not going to talk about that in this video. Now, when it comes to items such as weapons and everything like that in the game, we're going to leave out quivers and shields for this one, because quivers is basically just life and resist and maybe some form of damage, and the same thing goes for shields. But for weapons specifically, depending on what type of a build you are playing, depends on what types of weapons you want. Now, I'm going to go over the very generic things so you know kind of what you want for your leveling builds. For example, if you're playing a spell build, it is very strong to have flat spell damage. And what is flat spell damage then? Well, as you can see on this wand, for example, it adds 3 to 64 lightning damage to spells. So anytime I cast a spell, it's going to add 3 to 64 lightning damage to that spell. This is flat damage, and flat damage is incredibly strong early on when you're leveling. A lot of people might get mistaken, like, oh, 40% increased spell damage sounds great. Yeah, but let's say you have 10 flat damage, like you use a skill that's going to do 10 damage. How much more is 40% on top of 10? Well, it's not that much. But if you instead have 3 to 64, which is average like 30 lightning damage to spells, you're instead going to do 40 damage per spell. So flat spell damage is huge. Now obviously you want things as spell damage and maybe critical strike chance and things like that as well, depending on what build you're playing, but all that can depend on what playstyle you have, what you want on your skill tree, what spell you're using, and so on. So I'm just giving you the generic stuff, like flat spell damage is very good to have, and of course having things as spell damage is going to help a lot as well. You can also have things like resistances on wands and weapons, so do keep that in mind. If it rolls something like resistances on this wand, then that's pretty nice to have. Now, for other things, such as I have a bow build here, or a bow weapon here, for when you're dealing physical or elemental damage, you kind of want to have a large flat number as well. And this can be determined based on the bow that you have, the base of the bow and all that stuff as well. And bases are really important. We're going to talk about that later. But for example, on this bow, I have 75% increased physical damage. So the bow, let's say it has like 50 flat physical damage on the bow itself. Then you increase that by 75%. Then I also have 867 lightning damage as well. So if you look at the top of the bow, you see physical damage 49 to 128, and then you see elemental damage 8 to 167. So if I deal any form of damage with, like, let's say rain of arrows with this weapon, it's going to deal the physical damage and it's also going to deal the elemental damage. So it's kind of important to have those numbers on the bow high for a lot of these like physical elemental or just elemental skills that you're using while leveling, because it takes a lot of the damage from the bow. Certain skill gems in Path of Exile scale better than others. Leveling skill gems or things like that can be very different. Like spell gems, for example, scale very good off gem levels themselves. So when you have a spell gem that shoots spells, if you level the spell gem, it can gain a lot of damage. And then you have things like flat damage on your wand, and it can deal a lot of damage overall. But for example, bow skills don't really scale that well during leveling from just levels of the skill itself, the gem, so to say. So it is very important to have a good weapon in order to increase your damage, like this one, physical damage and elemental damage. And the same thing goes here for earlier. I can take this because it has open prefixes and open suffixes. I could take this to the crafting bench and I could add things like flat physical damage that would increase the physical damage that the bow has overall. I could also add things like attack speed, which can also be quite important to have on weapons as well. Now the base of the bow is basically what gives it this implicit modifier at the top here, increased critical strike chance. It is also the base of the bow also determines the amount of physical damage it has from the beginning, and it also determines the critical strike chance of the bow itself. You can see 6.9% here. and it also determines the attacks per second. 1.2 attacks per second is quite low, so if you're shooting a lot of arrows with this, it's going to feel a little bit clunky because the attack speed is very low. So if I would put some attack speed on this, I would have 1.32 attacks per second, which would be much better. So keep that in mind, that attack speed is very important for very many of these like more physical builds, and then you also want a lot of flat damage there as well. And the same thing goes for this sword that I have here. We have some increased physical damage. We have some adds 10 to 25 physical damage, which is flat physical damage. Then I also have global critical strike multiplier, which is nice if I'm playing a crit build. And for this one, for example, I see that I have prefix and suffix open, so maybe I can make this even stronger, because right now I see that it only has 5622 physical damage, and we want to bump those numbers up. So let's see here. I can't add any form of physical stuff except for this one. So you see here, percentage physical damage. So let's craft this one, for example, because I might only have 8 alterations. And the higher craft that you add to your item depends on what the level requirement of the item is as well. So keep that in mind. So I'll add this. I now have 87 to 192 physical damage on the bow. On the sword. So now the sword is a lot better. So keep that in mind. Depending on what you're leveling, you want different things on your weapons, but you mainly want the same things on your normal gear as well. And that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you need any help, you can always reach me in my Discord or on my stream at twitch.tv/burgerbrush. Remember also to like the video and subscribe to my channel. And of course, have a fantastic day.